I'm Ryan Flom. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of the Softwood Lumber Board. And the Softwood Lumber Board is an industry-funded initiative that really focuses on the economic and environmental advantages that wood brings to the built environment. If you don't know the SLB, you may know some of our funded programs like the American Wood Council, Think Wood, or Woodworks. And all of those initiatives and efforts are here to build a better world for those that are in it.
So all the work that SLB does on behalf of the softwood lumber industry and the construction industry, you also recently have been focused very much on championing and demystifying mass timber as a sustainable building material of the future. Why do you think it's important for the industry to get on board with this technology?
Well, frankly, we're behind. I mean, 40% of the carbon emissions in the world are from the built environment, whether that's embodied or operational energy that's being used. And wood brings a unique advantage to the built environment. Wood's the only renewable and replenishable resource that we have that we're using in structural buildings. And it's far less carbon intensive than some of the other materials that we use in that space.
Say a little bit more about the embodied carbon benefits of timber. How does timber construction lower embodied carbon? And how can other things like proper land management and the reuse of timber potentially at the end of the building's life cycle contribute to that?
Sure. Well, with the forestry practices that we have in North America, that's both US and Canada, we've had net forest growth for the past 50 years. So we are growing more trees than we are cutting down and harvesting for buildings and other uses of wood products that we have out there. And that's across the board, from lumber to paper to other biomass, etc. We're growing more than we're cutting. So number one, that means we're sequestering more in those trees than we are actually storing in the built environment. But if we can continue that life cycle, right? So we grow, we harvest, we cut, and then we store them in those buildings, we can not only take in new carbon and lock that up, but then we can also store it for the next 50 or 100 years, depending on the life cycle of the building.
Excellent. What do you want everyone to know about mass timber as it becomes more prominent in cities, on college campuses, on corporate campuses, nationwide?
Well, one of the things is that you have incredibly smart teams that are working on mass timber buildings. So from engineers to architects to developers to builders, there's a whole suite of people that are working on these buildings, just like there are when a concrete or steel building that are being built. And all buildings are built to code. So regardless if it's a wood structural building or a steel structural building or a concrete structural, many times they're hybrid buildings, right? So wood, steel, and concrete play into all buildings that we have in the built environment. And the biggest thing to that is that all of these buildings are resilient to seismic activity. They're resilient to fire and have durability built into them because of codes and standards. So that's a key benefit that we're bringing to the built environment. And then I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about wellness. Most of us spend a majority of our day and a majority of our lives inside of buildings, whether it's at our home, at our office, the places we go, sporting events, religious centers, etc. We're indoors. And especially in Chicago or where I'm from in Minneapolis, we spend more time indoors because of the climate and the weather that we're experiencing. So we need our buildings to contribute to our wellness as opposed to what might be the other side is take away from our wellness and the biophilia.
It's no secret that catastrophic events like the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 loom large in our city's collective memory. Can you say more about the fire resistance aspects of mass timber if people are wondering, is this material truly safe?
Sure, good question. Mass timber performs in a different way than light frame does when you talk about resiliency to fire and fire codes and safety. And that's probably the biggest piece is the International Code Council in 2021. And this is folks made up of engineers, architects, code officials that understand how buildings are built and that safety is really their number one priority. When they put these codes forward, that allows us to build up to 18 stories now in the US with mass timber specifically, they built the codes in a way that makes sure the fire testing and make sure all the other testing is in place and that these buildings are resilient so that if there is a fire, occupants can get out safely and that there's no harm done.
Great. Last question. Gaze into your crystal ball. In 10 years' time, is mass timber still a niche product, at least in North America? or will it stand alongside steel and concrete as a mainstream building material?
So I think it'll stand alongside steel and concrete, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. I alluded to it earlier, but we live in hybrid buildings. So whether they're primary wood or primary steel or primary concrete, many of the buildings that we're in today are a hybrid of those structures. And I think that's where the true future lies, is to use each material for its biggest benefit to its occupants. So wood, as I said earlier, has a unique carbon advantage. We can sequester carbon through trees, we can store it in the wood, but we certainly need steel connections. We need, concrete at its base level for parking structures or in ground contact. So I think, where I see the future going is we use the best material that we have available that has the least amount of carbon footprint for the benefit of the occupants that are in those buildings.
Ryan, thank you for sharing your thoughts and for all of your support in making this exhibit possible.
Thank you, Ian. We're really excited to kick off here today at CAC. It's been a year plus in the making, and excited to see people walk through it, both from the general public as well as design professionals, and get their take on what we're doing here and whether or not it's impactful. So truly excited to be here, and thank you for having me.